Hare Krishna. So welcome to our course on meditation. We will very quickly set up the board. Right. So this is mantra meditation, session number 1. So as I mentioned earlier, in this session, we will spend some time trying to understand some basics of meditation as to why meditation in itself has been seen as one of the important elements of any kind of spiritual practice. It's interesting to note that both from the Western as well as from the Eastern schools of philosophy, meditation has been universally accepted as one of the very, very powerful spiritual practices. And even if you're focusing more from the Vedic schools of thought, whether it be Dhyana Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Jnana Yoga, or even Bhakti Yoga practices, meditation is a common element among all these schools of thought. So therefore, it's very interesting to see, and not just in Vedic schools. If you look at certain other schools, like for example, the Buddhist traditions or the Jain traditions, right? Even they have meditation as one of the very, very important aspects of their practice, the sadhana that they have, right? So that shows what importance meditation, what role meditation as such plays in the spiritual journey of the soul in its quest towards understanding itself. So to dive deep in this understanding of what meditation is and why meditation is, let's get some fundamental basics in place. Right now, the first aspect we'll try to understand is this whole mind body soul dynamics. Right, so the Bhagavad Gita in the 13th chapter very nicely talks about the concept of how the soul is interacting with nature, how the soul's consciousness is getting entangled with matter, right? How the Prakriti and Purusha are getting entangled. Prakriti here means material nature, Purusha here means the soul, right? So we're going to use some concepts from the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita and mainly from the Yoga Sutras for this part of the discussion. So the first topic that we'll try to understand is the soul mind matter interaction, right? So we all know this, that the soul is right now interacting with matter, right? So if the whole basis of the second chapter Gita talks about how we are not this body, we are the soul. So beyond these layers of matter, the external matter like our body, the flesh, the bones, the skin, right? Or more deeper, if you look at it, all the pancha mahabhutas, earth, water, fire, air, ether, which is what our body is made of, right? Beyond that is that conscious force, that living force, right? So we'll not go into details of the difference between soul and matter. So presuming that we understand this concept of how soul is distinct from matter. Now, while the second chapter talks about the soul matter distinction, we know that the nature of soul is very different from matter. Right? The nature of soul is described in the Vedic literature as Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Sat here means a sense of permanence. Sat means a sense of permanence. Chit means cognizance, means awareness, knowledge, awareness, cognizance, right? The ability to perceive things. All of that is part of Chit aspect. And the Ananda is its state of bliss, right? So we'll focus first on the permanence aspect. The nature of the soul is permanent, meaning that it is not subjected to deterioration. If you look at the world around us, matter for that matter is constantly going through change. In fact, the very fundamental nature of matter is it is asat. Asat means something that is subjected to change, something that is temporary in nature. Right? So if you look at the world around you, everything is changing. Seasons change. Our bodies keep changing. The whole planetary system is changing. If you look at it from a larger time frame, even the great Himalayas are also changing, right? So everything around us, in fact, there is nothing permanent but change, as a famous expression goes. That's the nature of this world around us. The world of matter is constantly changing. And yet, with this constantly changing matter is the soul, whose nature is permanence, right, which is exactly opposite to matter. It's these two, matter and spirit, are so strongly interacting with each other. And it's amazing how the soul is completely identifying with something so foreign to it, something so different to it. And this has been a subject of great discussion across various Vedic and non-Vedic schools of thought, that how is the soul matter, or even if the word soul is sounding too complicated, how is life and the external agencies of this body, how are they interacting, right? Like, for example, the moment I develop a desire of wanting to do something or say something, immediately the body responds. My vocal cords respond, my hand responds. There's a very strong sync between that inner life force, that inner essence, that who we are, with the external matter. So how is this interaction happening? Because it's like two total opposites are working together in such a nice, synchronous, cohesive way. How is it possible? Imagine there are two people. One person is talking Arabic and other person is speaking Chinese. How do these two people interact with each other, right? So naturally, when two people talking different language, they need to interact. They need an interface in between. And that interface is what is called as chitta, or the mind. Chitta, or the mind. It is the channel through which consciousness makes itself interact with matter. That is what the chitta is, right? Now, what do you think would be the nature of this mind? Should it be permanent or should it be temporary, right? So if you think about it, the question is as simple as asking, what language should an interpreter speak? When an Arabic person and when a Chinese person need an interpreter in between, a translator in between, which language do you think the interpreter needs to speak? Naturally, the interpreter needs to know both the languages. And that is how the nature of mind also has been described. The mind has a tendency to remain in a permanent state. At the same time, the mind also has a tendency to be very fickle, to be constantly changing, going through its various temporary phases, right? In the yogic language, in the Yoga Sutra language, it is called as the vrittis of the chitta. Vrittis means fluctuations or oscillations. And this nature of the mind is something of our interest to really understand what meditation is. Because the more the mind tilts towards the side of change, we call it as a materialistic mind. Materialistic mind. But at the same time, more the mind tilts towards the side of permanence, that is called as a spiritualized mind. Right? So when we talk about spirituality in general, the bottom line is, irrespective of which school of yoga it is or whichever tradition it is, the bottom line is we are trying to spiritualize the mind. We are trying to spiritualize our interface between soul and matter. That is what we are trying to do through all our spiritual practices, right? And this, now the question that comes is, what does it mean to have a spiritualized mind? Is it just about a mind who's always thinking about spiritual activities, having spiritual thoughts, interacting with spiritual objects? Is that all what it mean by spiritualized mind, right? Well, the answer again, this understanding is also not very difficult. If you see, what did we define as being spiritualized? Being in a state of permanence. So spiritualized mind is nothing but a mind, a sat mind, or a mind that is experiencing a state of permanence or stability. Or in other words, a state where the chitta vrittis, or the fluctuations and oscillations of the mind, are no more taking place, right? And this is what we are calling as a spiritualized mind. Now, what do you mean by a permanent mind, a non-fluctuating mind, right? Or in other words, a spiritualized mind is nothing but an absorbed mind. Or in other words, a meditative mind. When the mind is in an absorbed state, or what we call as a meditative state, it does not fluctuate or it does not oscillate. So just bringing the mind to some kind of a deep absorption is actually bringing the mind to a spiritualized state. In fact, that is a state where we experience real ananda or real bliss, right? To illustrate this concept of the nature of happiness of the mind, let's try to understand this concept. The second concept that we'll try to understand now is the nature of happiness. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna very nicely he explains that many people of this world think that happiness means interaction of senses and their corresponding sense objects. Senses plus sense objects, right? That's what most people think. Like, for example, the eyes coming with a beautiful sight, or the tongue coming in contact with something tasty, or the ears interacting with some pleasant sound, right? And we think, oh, whenever I see something very delightful, whenever I taste something tasty, whenever I hear something very musical or pleasant, think, I feel so happy. You think, oh, this is where happiness comes from, right? But Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad says that yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yoneshu evate. Because one who thinks that happiness is a product of senses and sense objects coming together is a foolish person. Because a wise person does not indulge in this kind of happiness, because they know anything that has a beginning has to have an end, right? So the nature of these kind of happiness is they have a beginning, and consequently they have to have an end. So then the yogic texts, they further probe this concept that if happiness is not coming from the interaction of senses and sense objects, then where is happiness coming from? What is exactly happiness, right? So to understand that, let's take another example. Imagine you're listening to a favorite song. The first time you heard some very, very nice pleasant music, or some song, or very nice orchestral rendition, and when you hear that, you feel, wow, this is so nice. You are really completely absorbed in the music, and you're listening to it, and you feel like listening to that song again and again. You play that song, you hear again, and then you hear it the fourth time, the fifth time, the 10th time, the 20th time, and then over a period of time, maybe probably the 100th time, you get a little bored with that song, right? And then you think, oh, maybe I should change the song. And or if imagine if somebody forces you to listen to that song 100 times, 200 times, 300 times, at a certain point you will start, ripping your hair off, and you'll say, oh no, I'm done, enough, please don't torture me anymore, right? Now the question that comes is that if happiness is an interaction of happiness, a result of the interaction of senses and sense objects, right? So the song is the sense object, your ear is the sense. Both of them have not gone through any change. The first time when you heard that song, the ears heard that song and you experienced delight. The thousandth time that you hear that song, you are experiencing frustration, disgust, probably some misery as well. But if you see analytically, the song has not changed from the first time to the thousandth time. Your power of hearing has not changed from the first time to the thousandth time. Yet, the experience that we derive out of their interaction has changed. So, why is it that happiness has transformed into a state of misery or disgust? This is very nicely explained, that actually that happiness we experience the first time is not because of the song or your ears. It is because the first time when you heard that song, your mind was absorbed in that music. And the thousandth time when you are hearing that song, your mind is no more absorbed in the music, right? So that goes on to show that happiness is nothing but a state of absorbed mind. That's it. It has nothing to do with the senses, sense objects, what is happening with your body, nothing. Happiness is nothing but a state of absorbed mind. The more your mind is absorbed, the more closer we come to our spiritualized state. And the more we come to a spiritualized state, more that bliss comes out. And that is also a very important point. The Upanishads very nicely state this concept called as Anandamayo Bhyasat. Anandamayo Bhyasat, meaning that each and every one of us, Anandamaya Abhyasat, one Acharya very nicely, he explained that we should all practice, Abhyasa means practice, we should all practice entering into that Anandamaya state, or Anandamaya means where your entire being is in a state of bliss, right? So how do you practice that? How do you enter into that state? Is bringing your mind to a more absorbed state. So when the mind is absorbed, we come closer to our spiritual state. So why is it that coming close to a spiritual state brings us happiness? Because that ananda is the very nature of the soul, right? Many times, we think that happiness is something external. We have to do something outside of us to experience happiness. But the Vedic philosophy very emphatically states that actually happiness is more of an internal state. It is a state of absorbed mind. There's a very beautiful example given of a musk deer. If you see a musk deer, it is described that it is always trying to chase this very beautiful fragrance that it is constantly smelling everywhere in the forest. It is running here and there. It is every time it runs to a place, it feels, oh, maybe the smell is coming from little bit ahead. Again, it runs ahead and says, no, maybe it's little more ahead. Literally, it is said that sometimes the musk deer runs all around looking for that beautiful fragrance, and eventually it even dies sometimes due to fatigue. But where that fragrance is coming from? It is coming from its own belly. It is coming from its own body. So that happiness that we are chasing outside is actually within us. In fact, all the so-called activities that we think are bringing us happiness, even in this world, there is joy, there is some happiness even in this world. To say that there is no happiness in this world is also very incomplete philosophy, right? There is happiness in this world, but that happiness is not coming from the world. But the objects of the world, they allow you to temporarily bring your mind to an absorbed state and bring out that inner happiness. You see? So it is not that when you're listening to that song, it could be any ordinary song, a song belonging to this world, right? So when you're hearing that song, what is happening is that temporarily that song is providing you an opportunity to absorb your mind. Every time, when we indulge in sense gratification, there is no happiness in matter and matter interacting, but or this body and matter, when matter and matter means the body and matter, when we interact, actually there is no happiness in that. The real happiness is actually coming from the soul. That little momentary contact brings the mind temporarily to a state of absorption, and then the inner joy comes. So that is why actually when the scriptures say that there is no joy in this world, it does not mean that we cannot have joyful experience in this world. That's not the right philosophy. What it means is that the source of happiness is not this world. The source of happiness is within us. The world temporarily facilitates our inner joy to come out by bringing the mind to a state of temporary absorption. Now, my dear friends, please understand, with some little temporary absorption, we derive so much happiness. Literally, the whole world is chasing that happiness coming from the interaction of senses and sense objects, right? Even the temporary contact is providing so much of happiness. Imagine through meditation, if we can come to a state of really long lasting state of absorption, what kind of a happiness, what kind of a bliss we'll be able to experience, right? And that is why this expression Anandamayo Bhyasat is so important, because that Ananda, which is the nature of the soul, is what that we need to bring out. We have to become Anandamaya. Right now we are sense maya, we are indriya maya. We are only focusing on our senses and the worldly objects. Our entire awareness is filled with the world and the worldliness and the worldly objects. So we are trying to, when we say we are trying to spiritualize our mind, what we are trying to do is bring that mind to a steady state, to a more sat state, to an absorbed state, by which we can actually experience, bring out that inner happiness in a more powerful way, right? So now, what does it mean now to bring the mind to that kind of a state? So that will be our next subject of discussion. So let me just mark this page. So the next thing now that we'll try to understand is, after having understood nature of happiness, is that a very important question about if meditation is that process by which I can bring the mind to a steady state and bring out that inner happiness of the soul. What is meditation? Meditation, is it a technique? Right? Is it some kind of a procedure? Is it some kind of a step-by-step process? Today there are so many apps that claim that they will guide you into meditation and this and that, right? But first thing we should be clear that meditation is not a technique, right? In fact, the moment we use the word techniques are some logical procedures. Like when I use logical, they're algorithms. They are like SOPs, standard operating procedures. So any kind of a technique is just a bunch of A, B, C, D, E steps being taken, right? And with those steps being taken, that is what we call as, and people think, oh, meditation also means, I have to take A, B, C, D, E steps, and then I'll enter into a state of meditation, right? But that is not what meditation really is, right? Because when you talk about logical procedures, what we are when we talk about any kind of a logical process, we are dealing with lot of worldly objectivity. We are trying to very objectively see things. Okay, what is this? this is a black color pen, it is a cylindrical structure, its length is this, its breadth is this, blah blah blah, right? You're trying to look at this object, this pen, in a very very objective way, in a very very logical objective way. But you see, what we are trying to enter, when the mind needs something to absorb, it does not absorb in these logical details, it does not absorb in information. The mind likes to absorb in experiences. And right, let me write this down. Mind doesn't absorb in information, but in experiences. Right? When I use experience, it means, what does this pen mean to me? How does it feel to me? What is the feeling? What is the experience that this pen is creating to me? It could be anything. It could be a very neutral experience. It's just a pen. For someone, pen could mean all the torture that they went through their schooling, right? So maybe their teachers would give a lot of homework. So pen means a lot of hard work and effort, and maybe it has a very negative experience. Or somebody who's a writer who loves writing, maybe pen could mean a very very positive experience. Ultimately, the mind focuses on those subjective experiences. When we use the word subject experiences, we are talking about a very very subjective, individual, personal reality, right? And having, meditating on this or absorbing in this individual, personal, subjective reality is something that we slowly lose touch with, especially, and unfortunately, the way the world is designed and way our education systems are designed, there is so much of focus on objectivity that this individual, personal, subjective experiences are many times pushed away in the background. The world is constantly imposing upon us that this is good, this is bad. Pen is good, you have to like pens because you are a student, right? So when the worldly objectivity superimposes itself on our personal individual subjectivity, we lose that kind of inner creative side of us. For those of you who understand this language of the left brain, the right brain, modern science also explains that how the left brain is our more logical, rational side. The right hemisphere of the brain is the more creative, emotional, side of us, the artistic side of us. And when we end up focusing too much on the objective and sharpening more of our logical side of us, we lose touch with the subjective side. And much of our absorption, of course we need a balance of two, but much of our absorption is actually triggered by these individual, personal, subjective experiences. And it's important that we learn to refine our senses to start capturing these subtle experiences. Not get carried away with the gross objectivity, but sometimes just interacting with people. This is a very nice exercise that you actually can do, which is, next time when you look at an object, if something new or something old, or maybe when you meet a person, when you're meeting them, focus on not just certain objective details like, okay, the height of the person, okay, I know this person. When I look at the person, we focus on how the person looks like or who the person is, etc. But just pause a minute. Say if you're looking at a new person, try to capture what is the initial thoughts that you have of the person, what are the initial feelings that you got about the person, what are the initial vibes that people use this word, I got strange vibes from this person, or I got very positive vibes from this person. Try to focus on that. How interacting with that person in the first instant, what was the subjective, individual, personal experience that you had, right? Try to focus on that. And meditation is all about going deeper into this subjective space, right? Uh, which does not mean that meditation is not a very objective process. That's not what I mean. What I mean here is that the mind, the subtle senses and the mind need to be trained into absorbing these subtle aspects of reality, and bringing the mind completely absorbed in that state, right? And let's write this point down, that we need to refine our subtle senses, right? Subtle senses or subtle awareness, both within the body and outside the body, right? And there are lots of exercises that you can do. Like one exercise I gave you is, let me write it down the different color. We can let me list out some exercises. So these are some exercises that you can actually practice. Just go talk to a random or just be in the presence of a person, and try to not just look at the person or hear the person, but feel the presence of the person in a room, right? Feel the presence of a person in a room. So if needed, close your eyes. I'm sure some of you would have had experience of this, where especially somebody whom whom you interacted with a lot. So imagine you're busy working on your desk, reading something, or you're working on your laptop, and if that person comes and stands behind you, you actually you feel the presence of that person, right? And okay, this person has come, and you probably would be turning around and looking at them or something, right? So how does it happen? Because objectively speaking, only when my eyes see a person, I can register, or some sensual, some sensory perception has to happen. I have to smell the person, I have to either hear the person walk in, I have to see them, right? Something has to happen at the level of the senses to interact, to know the person's presence. But here, none of your senses got triggered. But when I use the word subtle senses, this is what we mean, right? The senses, they exist on a very gross form, but we also have what is called as subtle senses, and the subtle senses can even transcend the limitation of the physical senses, right? That's a whole deep science. We'll not go into that, probably in a different seminar for that. But what we can do is just learn to practice, just through focus. Just try to see, can I, maybe you can even ask that person that whenever you want, if there are two people at home, this is a nice exercise you can do. Tell the person that in the next 1 minute or so, come very silently and stand behind me, and you can actually close your eyes and start activating your internal radar, your internal senses, and start feeling the presence of person. And as soon as they walk in, you'll actually see a different sensation coming in, and okay, now this person has walked in, right? So start feeling the subtle presence of person in a room, or feel the vibes of different objects. Different objects also carry different vibes and sensations. So go pick up different objects that you have in your house, or maybe even close your eyes, keep different objects in front of you, right? And just try to physically try to focus your awareness on an object with your eyes open or with your eyes closed. Sometimes you can even put your palms close to the object and start feeling the presence of that object, and how does it feel. Certain objects will carry a very heavy energy with them. Certain objects will be very uplifting, very positive. You actually feel you don't feel any blockage. Some objects, as you come closer, you feel a very repulsive vibes coming from that, right? So basically, or even another very nice exercise you can actually do is go for a walk in nature. Go for a walk in nature and don't just get carried away with the clean air and the beautiful sounds and the nice early morning temperature, but start experiencing what kind of sensations you're having in your body as you're walking through. Maybe as you're walking past a stream, how are you feeling? As you're looking at the mountain, how are you feeling? As you walk past a tree, or maybe when you go around a tree, how are you feeling? Right? And different trees may give a different kind of sensation to you, right? So this is a very, very powerful way uh, of developing these subtle senses, right? So when you develop these subtle senses, what eventually happens is you will start experiencing a kind of inner transformation. And this is the point that we are coming to, that meditation is not a technique, but it's an inner transformation. Whenever I say technique, techniques are very forced procedures upon us. Whereas transformation is a very, very, when a transformation happens, it becomes a very natural process, right? Like, for example, if ice needs to be transformed into or converted into water, I just have to put that ice outside. Water is a natural state of ice. So it very, very quickly transforms, very easily, naturally, the ice transforms into water if you just put it in the ambient temperature. But on the other hand, if you have a sheet of metal and if you want to convert it into a box, there has to be some force applied on the box, right? It's a very, you have to apply, you have to reshape that sheet of metal by applying some force and putting it into a mold and converting into a shape of a box. So you see, techniques are many times like that. Techniques are very forced, forceful methods. Whereas transformative techniques, transformative processes, they are very much natural. And meditation eventually, if you start, why am I emphasizing so much on this is that some of you may be taking notes and, you may be try, okay, let me follow this ABCDE protocol, but meditation just doesn't work that way. It's an inner state that we have to enter into. It's an inner transformation that we have to create for ourselves, right? So until that the transformation happens, meditation will just be a joke for us, like that. So now, but when we are trying to focus on these subjective aspects, right, the next thing we'll try to understand is that what are the obstacles that come in our meditation process, right? Let's take a new sheet. Right. The main challenge in meditation. Now, as I mentioned, meditation involves our subtle senses and the mind, which basically are trying to interact with our subjective experiences. Right. So these subjective experiences are usually what we, in a very simple language, we can even call as our emotional responses. Right. And these emotional responses are where, or that inner space where all our emotional responses come from, and where our emotional responses have been stored, is where the disturbance for meditation also rises, right? So one of the very important functions of the mind, of the chitta, that Patanjali talks about is what is called as smriti. So one of the important aspects of the mind is smriti, or memory, right? So to retain an experience is what is called memory. So what does this memory do? How are things stored in our memory space? We use emotions are the glue that sticks events or things associated with that strong emotional experience is what that we retain for a very, very long time. If you had a very, very ordinary normal day, you may not even remember what did I do today, right? But if you had a very emotionally stimulating experience, as soon as you went to office, suddenly everybody started clapping for you, and they glorified you. Oh, you are the employee of the month, and that day you'll remember very strongly. Also, you'll remember that day where everybody is shouting at you and your boss is about to fire you for whatever goof ups we made. If you had a very negative experience also, that day also you remember. So basically, emotions are that glue that sticks experiences into our memory. And when we sit down for meditation, and when we are trying to interact with these subjective experiences, our emotional responses, we are trying to work with our subtle senses in the mind, we are basically stirring this inner space of our memory. And naturally, when you try to absorb the mind, so what happens is the past impressions that we've had, they start coming up, right? So many times our past emotional responses, right, they come out as some kind of a programmed response. We may not even be aware of it. In Sanskritam, what I use the word some programmed responses, these are called as samskaras, right? Samskaras are kind of mental impressions, and many times we are not even aware of that, but it seems like we are programmed to function in a certain way. As soon as you are put in a particular situation, or you see a particular object, or you go to particular place, or sometimes even particular time of the day, or particular seasons, etc., we start acting as if some kind of an inner program is activated. For example, if despite some situation being very happy, out of nowhere some inner programmed response comes, and some external trigger happens, and some kind of programmed response comes, and you just start suddenly becoming sad despite everything being very, very happy around you, right? So how is this, where exactly is programmed response is happening, right? So to understand that, I'll give a very nice simple flow chart of how we interact with this world. You see, the soul, all that the soul does is it expresses its desire, right? While interacting with this world, all that the soul does, it expresses a certain kind of desire, and this desire is given a particular shape by the mind, right? So like, for example, soul by default, its only desire actually is to be happy. There's no other desire. Anandamayo bhyasat, as I said, right? In fact, the soul's default nature is to be happy. But unfortunately, what happens when the soul is covered by the false ego converts its default state of happiness into a state of something lacking. And to fill that lack, we express a desire. So if I were to be a little more technically right, between the soul and the desire, there is this layer of false ego. So once the pure consciousness of the soul gets influenced by the false ego, it creates a particular desire. And the desire goes through the mind, and that mind processes that desire, converts it into a particular, it sends that signal to the body, and the body correspondingly creates an action. Right? I'm giving you a very simplified version. To be little more precise, that function of the mind in between is what is also governed or supervised by Paramatma. So this, what I wrote as mind here, if you see the bigger picture, in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is said the nature of this Paramatma is Upadrishta, Anumanta. Upadrishta means overseer, Anumanta means sanctioner. So here, this function of the mind, or our awareness to be in short, is what is governed by Paramatma. But that's it. At this point in a discussion, we don't need so many details. Let's just call it the chitta or the mind at this stage. So this action creates, as we know, every action, it creates another reaction in the form of these samskaras or impressions. And these impressions, like for example, every time you act, something is stored in our memory about that action. That is the impression we are talking about. And these impressions, they slowly build up over a period of time and start becoming your inclinations and your desires. So very soon, there is another channel of desire coming up from the impressions, from the samskaras in your mind, right? So over a period of time, what happens is the soul's expression of free will, though always there, is slowly curtailed, and we end up becoming a victim of our mind and our past impressions. And very soon, all that happens is, as you can see here, the desire from the soul given a shape through the mind, and the body executes it and performs an action. But over a period of time, the soul becomes a prisoner in the body and the mind, and what ends up happening is your past samskaras, your past impressions, they create your present desires. The mind executes the desire, the body, the mind communicates the desire, and the body executes that into an action, and that action creates another reaction. Again, the mind creates a samskara, and what ends up happening is you get stuck in this habit loops. These are the programmed responses I spoke about earlier. And when we sit down for meditation, it is these programmed responses is that is our biggest challenge to overcome, right? All of a sudden, you're trying to sit down to meditate, and some spurious thought comes, right? And it just, some sporadic thought comes, and that thought leads to another thought, and that leads to another thought, and very soon you'll be sitting down in meditation, and instead you'll be checking your mobile phone and starting checking your Instagram, and or start texting people, right, about something that you did 1 hour ago, right? So this is how we become victims of these programmed responses. So this is the main challenge in meditation. So how do you overcome this challenge? How do you overcome this this particular nature of the fluctuation nature of the mind? When we go back to the Yoga Sutras and also in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Let's mark this. That's section 5. So overcoming programmed responses. So Patanjali, he very nicely gives a two-step process to overcome this fluctuating nature of the mind because of its programmed responses. He uses two very important terms, abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa means practice and vairagya means dispassion, right? So the practice part is our meditation itself. So we'll elaborate more about this in the later, in a little ahead in the session, and tomorrow we'll focus more on that, our meditation process. But let's focus more about this dispassion aspect, right? So to understand this vairagya, raga means this worldly, attractions. Going beyond this worldly attraction is what is called as dispassion, right? It is not about lack of passion, but many times I like to translate it as distraction free passion, meaning that if you are focusing on your meditation, then you focus only on that without any distractions. That is what this vairagya means. So what happens because of lack of vairagya, or when you get caught up with this raga, what happens is that the mind gets carried away with its past pre-programmed responses and its emotional responses, and gets carried away in this whole process. So we need to provide a very strong attraction to the mind so that it remains focused in this meditation state. And this is where we need to understand the power of meditation processes, especially as taught in the bhakti schools of of spirituality, right? So if you look at meditation techniques in general, if you look at meditation practices in general, so there is the classical meditation techniques, and there is the bhakti meditation methods, right? What is the essential difference? So to understand it best, I like to give this example of processing of iron in an iron ore. When you have iron ore, if you want to separate the iron out of it, right? So what would happen in a regular process, right, is you have this big furnace, and in that furnace they put all the iron ore in it, and then they ignite it with fire. And once the entire iron ore gets really hot, so what happens is all the the iron ore melts, and as it melts, let's put that here, right? So there is this kind of an outlet that comes, and all the iron ore, it flows out, but on top of that there is so much of this dust. It's called slag, or all the impurities and whatever extra dirt and all it is just floating on top, and they have something to skim, and they remove all the dirt, and you get the iron ore separately. Or in other words, to put it in short, the focus on this kind of technique is put lot of heat, and by the intensity of that heat, you melt everything, and once it is in a molten state, then remove all the impurities. So if you actually see, the focus in this method is more on removing the impurities. Right? So this is literal and also metaphorical, in the sense that if you look at the classical meditation techniques, they also involve a lot of heat. Sit down in a particular position, close your eyes, keep your back straight, start meditating on some object of meditation, do a lot of austerities. So in the heat of austerities, when you put the mind, everything melts, and what happens? All the impurities. So impurities here means these attraction, the worldly attractions that we have, or that which created the raga, right? So when we spoke about here, we are talking about spiritual attraction here, not to be confused with material attraction, which creates the raga, the worldly attachment in the first place. So what causes this worldly attachment are these lust, anger, greed, pride, envy, illusion, all these shad anarthas. So the focus in the classical method is, with the heat of tapasya, remove all the impurities aside. Right? That is the focus. But if you look at another way of processing the iron ore, imagine if I have a big surface on which I put all the iron ore, all the iron particles and sand and whatever the impurities that are there. And if I can bring one big magnet, a big magnet near that ore, very naturally the iron particles will be attracted to the magnet and they will go stick to that magnet. Simple. And you are not, so if you see this method, while the previous method the focus was on removing impurities, in this method the focus was on attracting iron. In the bhakti school of meditation, it's very similar to this. So what we are doing in the bhakti school, our focus is not on austerities to put the mind under control and and try to remove the impurities. Yes, the focus is still, anartha nivritti is still there, but the focus is more on how do we attract the mind, because the nature of the soul, the nature of jiva is, the jiva has a very natural rasa with the Supreme Lord, right? The jiva is very naturally attracted. So the magnet which attracts us is Krishna. So the jiva has a natural rasa and an affinity towards Krishna. So all that the soul needs to do is come in contact with the strong spiritual presence of Krishna. And when one comes in contact with the strong spiritual presence of Krishna, the soul is very natural, our consciousness is very naturally attracted towards Krishna. That's the very nature of iron and magnet. You don't have to train an iron particle to become attracted to magnet. It is the very nature of iron particles. Likewise, we don't have to train ourselves to get attracted to Krishna. It is our very nature. The problem right now is we are covered with so many other distractions. So what we have to do is come as close to the magnet as possible. Create a very strong magnetic attraction to near us, or in other words, create a very strong spiritual attractive force near us, right? And that way our consciousness can very easily get attracted to the magnet of Krishna. So likewise, unlike the classical meditation technique, the focus is more on the austerity. Let's write this down. So while in the classical meditation techniques, the focus is more on austerity and removing the anarthas. In the bhakti school, the focus is more on creating that attraction to Krishna and allowing that soul to naturally get attracted. So the artha pravritti, or in other words, cultivating the positive includes elimination of the negative from the bhakti school of thought, right? So this is how um, this this aspect of spiritual attraction to overcome our dispassion, to develop that vairagya, is already inbuilt within the bhakti school of meditation, right? So with this particular understanding that we had, right, so let's now try to focus on the abhyasa, the practice aspect, right? So we got some basic understanding now, but let's now very quickly in the next 20 minutes or so focus more on the practice aspect itself, right? So let's try to talk about that. So section 6, right? Meditation abhyasa, right? So if you remember, we spoke about how we need to train the mind into getting attracted to Krishna. We spoke about how the mind needs to be brought very close to that strong magnet of Krishna. So what can be such a powerful magnet, right? So in the bhakti tradition, this is where mantras come into place. Mantras are the very strong spiritual presence of the divine, right? In fact, literally we can say mantras are like the sound representation of the Lord, right? So the word mantra, some of you would be knowing this. Man means the mind, and tra literally means to deliver, but a better translation here would be to something that helps to control or regulate. Literally, mantras are those which help in regulating the mind, and especially in the bhakti tradition, the mantras that we specifically chant, right? Because the mantras are also of two types, right? So there is the what I call it as the rigid mantras. Rigid mantras means there are certain mantras where one tries to connect with the Lord in his awe and reverence. They are the Lord's connection in awe and reverence. And because they are involved with awe and reverence, like for example, in a yagya, in a Vedic fire ritual, there are so many mantras that are recited. There we are trying to connect to Yagya Purusha, the Lord's presence in the fire in the form of this Yagya Purusha. So there's so much of awe and reverence involved. So there are a lot of rigid rules in terms of the time, the place, the circumstance, what is our physical state. You have to take bath, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to recite the mantras in a very specific way, you have to sit in a particular way, the right kind of ingredients have to be offered at the right muhurat, at the right time of the day, etc., etc. All these rules and regulations, they all come into play, right? On the other hand, there are other kinds of mantras which are called as the universal mantras or the personal mantras, which involve connecting to the Lord, connecting to the sweetness of the Lord. Right? At one level, you're connecting to the awe and reverence of the Lord. At the other level, you're trying to connect to the sweetness of the Lord. And this is where the direct holy names come in. Like for example, an example of the rigid mantra would be all the Vedic Upanishad, the Rigvedic mantras, for example, right? Whereas the universal or personal mantras, including direct names like the Hare Krishna Maha mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, all these mantras, they are more where you're trying to connect to the, the sweetness of the Lord. And in these, there are no, so there are no external rules and regulations, right? Like, for example, you can chant it anytime, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Tatrarpita na niyamita na smarana kala. There are no such external rules and regulations, no time, place, circumstance considerations, right? In that way, these mantras are very, very powerful, direct representations of the Lord. As one Acharya Rupa Goswami very powerfully he mentions that how Krishna's holy name is like a Chintamani stone. Nama Chintamani Krishna. Chintamani stone is like a wish fulfilling stone, like a philosopher's stone. Anything that you desire, holding that stone, it immediately gets fulfilled. So Nama Chintamani Krishna, Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. It is full of consciousness, meaning that just like how you and I are conscious living entities, the holy name is also conscious, meaning that when you interact with a person, that interaction of person creates a unique personal experience. Likewise, when you're chanting the holy names, when you're interacting with the holy names, with the sound of the holy name, it is going to create a unique personal experience for you. Just like when you talk to a person, the person has an ability to reciprocate with you. The holy name also has equal capacity to reciprocate with you. That is what it means. Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. It is an embodiment of consciousness that can reciprocate and give you that rasa. Nitya Mukto Purna Shuddho. It is ever liberated. The holy name is, it is not belonging to this world. Nitya Mukto and Purna Shuddho. Even though it is part of this world, it is always pure. It is purest of the pure. And most importantly, the last line he says, Abhinnatvam Nam Naminaha. Abhinna means non-different is the name and the named. Meaning that Krishna and his holy names are absolutely non-different from each other. Right? So that's why I said that whatever reciprocation you can get, imagine if Krishna were to be standing in front of you and you want to have a conversation with Krishna, whatever reciprocation you will get from Krishna, the same reciprocation you can actually get from Krishna's holy names. Right. That is the the description given across the Vedic scriptures at how the holy name is so very powerful. So these universal mantras or the personal mantras, therefore, are so very, very potent, right? So this, but to understand that, to understand when you talk about this kind of abhyasa that we are trying to do, we are basically trying to interact with this transcendental sound, this transcendental vibrations of Krishna, and that is how we are trying to absorb our mind, right? Because ultimately we need an anchor, we need some object of meditation. So the sound emanating from, or the sound of this holy name is going to be our object of meditation. That is going to be our practice, or that is going to be the process that we will try to take up to. Again, remember, every time I using the words process or technique, do not think that it is just an external routine. In fact, our abhyasa, our practice is going to go through 3 stages. The first stage is the physical process of chanting. Right? Where you, the meditator, your role is identified as the one who is chanting. 2, gradually as the practice deepens, the process, so many times the word, this whole mantra meditation in Sanskrit is called as japa, but and the loosely the word japa is translated as chanting. But I feel that is a very incomplete translation of the word. Japa is not just chanting. Japa, it begins with chanting. That's the first state the first state of awareness that the meditator enters into. But gradually from chanting, one graduates into the stage of hearing. right? We are trying to hear the mantra. And at a more deeper state, beyond chanting and hearing, one enters into the state of praying. And this is where we will experience the culmination of mantra meditation. So what you heard so far is just an introduction to the topic. So what this, what we'll essentially try to focus on is going through this transition from chanting to hearing to praying, right? So that's what we'll essentially try to focus on. So in today's session, I will try to talk a little more about the physical process, right? So if I may even put, while chanting is a physical process, hearing is happening in a mental space. While chanting is happening in a physical space, hearing is happening in a mental space, while praying is happening in your heart space, right? Now, when I use the word heart, what is heart? What is mind? What is the body? We will elaborate more on that in tomorrow's discussion, right? But at this point, you can even call it heart/soul space, right? So we'll understand it as happening at the level of the soul. So when you say chanting is a spiritual process, when it culminates to a state of praying, that is when it enters into a spiritual process. If our japa is only on a physical plane, then we are just doing the physical act of chanting. We have to take it from chanting, from physical space into a mental space, into a heart space. And it is not that when you're praying, you stop chanting, or when you're hearing, you stop praying. It is not like that. All these three need to happen together. And therefore, finding a synchrony between your body, mind, and heart is such an important practice of mantra meditation in the bhakti tradition, right? I keep emphasizing on this bhakti tradition aspect because the ultimate culmination in praying is one of the important aspects of the bhakti tradition. So this chanting, hearing, praying from body, mind, and heart synchrony is what that we are trying to achieve. So we will focus more on in today's session, we'll try to focus more on the physical aspect, fine-tuning the physical aspect of our mantra meditation. And in tomorrow's session, we will do a lot of fun exercises. Right here, sitting in front of your screen, you'll be doing some exercises on how to improve our quality of hearing. How do we deepen our presence in the mental space? Deepen our presence means, how do I become more aware in that mental space so that I can focus more on that hearing aspect? And we'll also talk a little bit about entering into that soul space or in the heart space where we can genuinely pray and cry out to Krishna, right? So today we will try to focus more on the physical aspect, right? So for that, we need to understand one very important theme on trying to understand the science of sound, right? So what is sound? So the Rig Veda, and especially in the Karma Mimamsa sutras and in that school of thought, the concept of mantras and sound has been very nicely elaborated. They talk about sound not just being what you just hear with your ears. In fact, sound, it exists at multiple layers, right? So what we usually refer to as sound is just the outermost layer, which is the physical sound. In Sanskritam, it is called as Vaikari, right? Like, for example, when you hear me clap, right? That clap in itself means nothing, or any kind of physical sound. Even as I'm speaking right now, if you don't understand the meaning or whatever, for some of you, it could just be some noise, right? Or somebody who's not probably wanting to hear the class, if they're hearing this sound in your house, right? For them, it's just some external layer of sound. It's just physical sound or some noise, right? But beyond the physical layer, right, there is the mental or emotional layer, which is called as madhyama, right? So madhyama layer of sound is where sound, it carries certain emotions, right? So when I say emotions, it means that when when we communicate with each other, many times it is not the words which we want to communicate. Words are just the outermost layer, but at a particular stage, you'll be feeling disturbed, you'll be feeling maybe very excited, you'll be feeling very happy, you'll be feeling very sad, right? So actually, it is that inner mental state is what we are trying to communicate, with the to the other person, and that is what is the madhyama level of sound. So when you use the word sound, many times we only think, oh, it should be audible, it should be heard, but it's not like that. Even what is happening in your mind is also a sound, right? And deeper than this mental slash emotional layer is our intellectual layer, which is called as pashyanti. Pashyanti literally means that which reveals, right? It is that, sometimes when you have an idea, or even some kind of a, maybe think of that moment of the moment you got an idea. That idea exists in your inner space in a very, very abstract way, and later when your mind processes that idea, it gives a particular shape and form and structure to that idea. But just try to recall, again, this is a very, very deep exercise. Just try to recall those moments where you had that aha moment. You just suddenly heard some, you are trying to solve a particular problem or trying to find a solution to a particular thing, and suddenly you meant aha. And when you say aha, just try to, if possible, pause time and try to meditate on what were the moments that led to that aha moment. Just before that aha moment, there was an abstract, that idea was present in that abstract layer, and from that abstractness, it suddenly took a shape, and that's when you said aha, right? In fact, this abstractness is what is called as that pashyanti layer, right? And in fact, this ideation layers, our inner determination, motivation, it all comes from this intellectual sound, right? In fact, uh, uh, all actions, it is said that the pashyanti becomes the impetus for all our actions. As, or in other words, ideas are the impetus for our actions. Every time you want to do something, you want to say something, you have to have some kind of an inner sound which eventually has to translate into an external sound. So before you produce an external sound, in your inner space, you created a particular concept, and that concept will then be driven by a certain particular feeling, and that feeling is what you bring out. The concept and the feelings combined together is what you bring out in the form of words. So if you see, so much of processing is happening internally, right? So this Vaikari, Madhyama and Pashyanti is something that we interact with on a daily basis, but somehow we are so dumb or unaware that we focus so much on the physical layer, we forget to focus on the Madhyama and the Pashyanti layers. So in tomorrow's exercise, we will try to do some activities where we try to connect to these deeper levels of sound through some regular interactions, right? And of course, beyond even this intellectual layer of sound is the spiritual layer, which is called as para. Para literally means that which is beyond, right? And it is this para layer of sound, which is what is the real potency that is in the form of a seed in every mantra. So when we are chanting different mantras, especially like for example the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, on one level it is just a particular sound. Like for example, sometimes people when who do not like these mantras or whatever, when they hear people chanting and hearing and singing loudly, for them it is just some noise, some external sound, some disturbance, right? Because they are connecting to the mantra only at a physical level. Sometimes even as meditators, when even during japa meditation, when we are just producing sound without any, even without any feelings or without any deeper levels of connections, we are just producing sound. But we are not talking about that level of sound here. Sometimes people connect to mantras at a more mental level, at an emotional level. So for such people, mantras create a very nice, feel good, relaxing experience. Sometimes people, they have this whole YouTube playlist of morning mantras, some Shiva Sukta, Gayatri Mantra, Hare Krishna Bhajan, some Vishnu Sahasranam, Kanakadara Stotra, all this kind of mantra playlists they create for themselves. And when they just listen to it while working or while getting ready or whatever it may be, it just creates a nice, good vibes. It creates a nice feel good factor because they have opened their consciousness just to that madhyama level of sound. But somebody who can even go a little more deeper and meditative, when they try to connect to that sound at that pashyanti layer, at that intellectual layer, then what happens? One tries to it just doesn't just go to their physical layer and their mental layer, but that mantra starts creating a deeper level of understanding of reality. That is what happens at the pashyanti layer. Our whole perception of reality starts to change as we start absorbing these mantras. And when you go even beyond that, this is something that happens in a very, very deep state where at that para level, the mantra, right now it is said that the soul is right now covered in spiritual ignorance or avidya, right? And that dark veil of avidya is what the mantra starts to penetrate. It cleanses, it removes all that, the coverings around the soul and allows the soul's full consciousness to start manifesting. That is what happens at that para, when one connects to the para level of sound. So when we are talking about chanting, it depends on which layer we are trying to connect. Am I just physically producing sound, right? Then, you are basically non-different from a machine. A machine also can produce sound. You are also vibrating your tongue and producing sound, right? So then you're just producing the Vaikari sound. But if you can invest, if you go a little deeper and start opening your awareness, your consciousness, at least at a mental, emotional level, start feeling the mantra, start realizing the importance of the mantra, right? So then you are producing a more deeper level of sound and connecting also at a more deeper level. And with a more deeper absorption, especially if you try to understand what is the meaning of the mantra, whom am I chanting about, right? If you just understand that, then one starts to connect at that pashyanti layer of sound. And this is what we are trying to, at least we need to come to, by our own efforts, we can actually come to at least to this layer of sound. And of course, when you go beyond and by the Lord's grace and by the spiritual master's grace, one can actually connect to that fourth level of sound also, even as we're producing that sound. So that's why when we're talking about chanting as a physical activity, so the first layer of abhyasa, right? So as a mantra meditation practice, at the mantra meditation at the level of, at the physical level, which is the chanting level, right? So we need to, first thing that we need to do is we try to connect at least, not just be stuck in the Vaikari, at least go deeper. So for that, we need to understand first the principles of mantras, right? Which is this Vaikari Madhyama Pashyanti Para. Try to understand this core, this basic science, this basic principles that we spoke about, and try to open your awareness to one of these, deeper layers, right? We'll elaborate more on this as a methodology, and we try to do some exercises also in tomorrow's class about this, right? But still focusing more on the physical aspect. The second aspect that I'd like to talk about at a physical layer, something that we can really work on very easily, is our physical posture, right? When we speak about the mantra meditation as a process, very important that our body should find a very nice physical alignment in the form of this posture. Many times during the meditation process, we create a lot of imbalance in our physical energies by not having the right posture. Like, I'll give you a very, very simple exercise which you can do later. Try meditating with your arms and legs spread apart, right? What will happen very soon? Either you'll fall asleep or you'll feel extremely distracted. So why is that? Because understand, our body is a carrier of energy, and we need to conserve that energy by curling in the energies into the system. So you would have seen traditionally yogis or even any kind of advanced spiritualist, they try to sit in that in a cross-footed position. By sitting in a cross-footed position, what are we doing? So the first aspect of posture is sit in a cross-footed posture. Why? By doing so, what we are doing is we are either it could be Sukhasana or Ardha Padmasana. Ardha Padmasana means putting one leg on top of the other, right? Or if you can actually sit in Padmasana for sufficiently long time, you can do that. But the point is, by doing so, all the extremities of your body is where you actually throw away energy out, right? So that's why even in many healing mechanisms also, people use their fingers to pass on energy, right? So when you sit in a very curled position, especially these two fingers also, we'll talk about the mudras a little later, right? But when you keep your feet in a cross-footed position, you are conserving all the energies internally. You're diverting all the energies internally. That way you will see that you'll be more focused, right? And two, try to keep your spine erect. Keep spine erect. Why? And also steady, huh? Like, don't keep going back and forth like this. Don't start dancing in the middle of your meditation, but rather when you keep your spine erect, the spine also is one of the important carriers of energy. It helps you to basically remain focused and concentrated. Just keeping your spine erect. Or you can also try this. Even if you just lie down, try to find a nice recliner in your house. And if you just lie down and chant, very soon you will fall asleep, right? Because that posture is not for meditation. It is not a yogasana, as B.K. Iyengarji, he writes in his book. This is not a yogasana, this is a bhogasana, meaning it is meant for bhoga, to enjoy, not for doing yoga. So he said you should keep your spine erect. And very interesting that in the Yoga Sutras also, when Patanjali has to describe about the asanas, interestingly, there are only 3 sutras in the entire book about asanas. And in the first sutra, where he describes the nature of asana being, sthiram sukham asanam, or a steady physical posture, is what is called as asana. In the commentary to that, one classical commentator, while Patanjali himself doesn't list any kind of asanas, a classical commentator, he gives a list of 11 asanas. And out of those 11 asanas, 10 asanas are all in sitting postures. basically indicating that our entire asana practice is eventually to come to a stage where we can go deeper into meditation. It's a preparation for meditation, because you have to train, you have to align your body to sit for a really, really long time in some kind of a meditative pose. So all the asanas, they talk about sitting postures and especially strengthening the spine and keeping the spine erect, right? So if some of you are facing some difficulty in keeping your spine erect, you can do some very, very simple exercises like, for example, the cobra posture, the locust posture, the cobra, any kind of asanas where you're trying to align the arch of your back, right? Exercising the arch of your back is very important. If you can, do some asanas, that will help you good. Or even just keep practicing when you're working, when you're sitting and reading, whenever you're sitting down, very consciously try to keep your spine erect, right? And that itself will help you to enhance a lot of your focus, right? If another way you can actually keep your spine erect is actually sit on a cushion, right? Sit on a cushion means that you can actually roll an old blanket or take a cushion. So if your sitting bones are on a slightly elevated, imagine if this is a flat surface, so you can actually roll a blanket or have some kind of a little bolster, and if you sit on that, you will notice that as you sit on that bolster, your hips naturally rotate forward, and once your hips rotate forward, your back automatically becomes very straight. So this is something which even I personally do. Whenever I sit for mantra meditation, I actually put a small shawl, a rolled shawl under my sitting bones, and automatically my back becomes very straight, and that's a very effective way of keeping the back straight, right? And another thing you can actually do is try to keep your hand in this Jnana Mudra, right? Jnana Mudra is this particular mudra that we use, wherein now these two fingers actually play a very, very important role. This finger, the forefinger, is the finger that we use to throw away energy out of our body, right? You would have noticed this is a very, very natural gesture. Any part of the world, irrespective of which world culture, which language they speak, the natural tendency is whenever you want to point at something or draw your attention towards something, we do this. Look at that. All world cultures have this. Look at that. Or if you want to find fault at someone, you point your finger towards the person. Look at this. Look at him. Right? What are we trying to do? We are trying to throw our attention towards that person. So this finger, it is described that this throws away energy, and the thumb is what that receives energy, right? And therefore, when you put these two fingers together, right? So naturally, you will see that you're curling in the energy back into the system, right? So this is a very, very powerful mudra to keep your left hand in, right? So the Jnana Mudra is described even when Lord Krishna was reciting the entire Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, his hand was in this Jnana Mudra as he was speaking the entire Bhagavad Gita. So this is, and in India also you will notice that many deities, they are carved with their hands in the Jnana Mudra, right? Even sometimes they are blessing with their full palm open, but many times you will see in the Jnana Mudra also they are blessing. So this is a very, very special mudra, right? And while our left hand is in Jnana Mudra, with our right hand, we start to focus on the touch sensation coming from the beads. So the beads that we use for the mantra meditation, right? We try to focus on the touch sensation. See, understand this touch is very, very important. In fact, it is a very, very powerful totem to bring our awareness back. every time the mind is getting distracted, just this touch awareness brings you back. Sometimes you can even try this exercise. Try chanting without your beads and just try to do some kind of mental japa. It's very difficult to keep the mind intact. But whereas when you have these beads, you will notice that it very effectively improves your ability to focus. Because whenever the mind gets distracted, as you're moving the beads, you're constantly creating this touch sensation. It's like a repeated pattern. Wake up, focus, come back. You're meditating, right? So constantly imagine you're doing some activity and somebody keeps reminding you, okay, focus, 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 So this kind of the whole traditional idea of using beads was that you use this touch sensation as some kind of a means of creating a physical awareness. Because ideally, during mantra meditation, you can keep your eyes closed. If you are falling asleep, then keep the eyes half open. So you're just looking about 1 meter in front of you. Keep your back erect, right? And you're sitting with your cross-footed position with the left hand, the Jnana Mudra. So as with your right hand, as you are, as you're moving, clicking the beads, that touch sensation keeps your awareness constantly intact. So whenever the mind gets distracted, the touch reminds you and gently brings your mind back into the process that you are involved in, right? So this is the physical part of our chanting, right? In fact, one more aspect of the physical one more method in the physical aspect that we can think of is a fixed time and place. Try to fix your specific time that you are trying to sit down for your meditation practice, mantra meditation practice. Your mind, just like how, for example, because the mind likes to operate with routines. So many times you'll notice that exactly when it is afternoon, you start feeling hungry, right? Because that's a lunch time, because you've trained your mind that way. So it becomes very, very natural for you to become hungry, and very naturally, you are drawn to food and you start eating food. So likewise, when you start meditating every day at a specific time, if you can create a fixed time for yourself, then very natural that the mind automatically at that time, it says, okay, now it's time for my meditation. So let me just sit down for meditation. It becomes very, very easy. If you keep changing your time of meditation, it takes that little extra effort, because already it's a very difficult task with a fluctuating mind, and on top of that, if you keep changing your time, also place plays a very important role. Also, if you can actually have one dedicated space, a physical space, preferably, you have a particular little mat, your own specific meditation mat, which you will say, okay, like for example, I use a mat like this. This is a very traditional kusha mat, right? So you can actually have any kind of a cloth mat or a kusha mat or anything like that. So you can just use that mat. You can sit down on that particular mat. Immediately, your physical body will start experiencing that kind of an alignment, right? So fixing a specific time and place is also very, very important. So cross-footed position, sitting on a cushion, keeping your spine erect, putting your left hand in the Jnana Mudra. Try to, keep your eyes closed or half closed, focusing on the touch sensation, and most importantly, fixing a particular time and place will play a very, very important role in bringing about a physical alignment, right? So these are the elements. And of course, while all these things are there, right, the third and perhaps the most important aspect is the proper pronunciation. Pronounce the mantra completely. Start practicing. It's not a race. When you're doing japa meditation, when you're chanting a specific mantra, it is not a specific race, but rather we are trying to slowly produce that sound and hear that sound, and thereby we try to because when physically we are aware, the mind also slowly, the mental awareness will also come. If physically you are distracted, if the pronunciation, if you start dragging the mantra, if the pronunciation is not clear, then the mental awareness will also not arrive. So this aspect also, we'll do some exercises tomorrow about some part of the physical also, but we'll focus more on the next two levels, right, which is the hearing and the praying aspects in tomorrow's discussion. All right, so I'll very quickly summarize. We discussed a lot of points today, so let me very quickly summarize what we discussed. We began the session first by understanding the science of the mind, matter, and soul interaction. We understood that how chitta, or the mind, is interface between matter and spirit, and how the nature of the mind, because it's an interface, it has both fluctuating nature. When it fluctuates, it becomes a materialistic mind, but it also has the ability to become absorbed and spiritualized, right? And when it comes to a state of permanence, or that absorbed state, that is what we're calling as a spiritualized mind or the meditative mind. Why is that absorbed mind so important? Because we understood the nature of happiness. Happiness means a state of absorbed mind, and we are trying to experience happiness, that which is there internally from the soul. But for that happiness to be experienced, the mind has to be in some kind of an absorbed state. Then we discussed how meditation is not a logical process, it's not a technique, but it's more of a transformative state that we have to enter into. And we spoke about subjective and objective experiences, and we discussed few exercises also, right, to harness that kind of subtle senses of the mind. Then we spoke about what is the main challenge in meditation are the samskaras, or the pre-programmed responses that we have, and how we need to we understood the science of how we create those samskaras, and how these samskaras are what that disturb us during our meditation process, not just in meditation, actually even in our day-to-day life as well, right? And how do we overcome these programmed responses? We discussed the two-step process of abhyasa and vairagya. In the abhyasa part, the meditation part, we discussed how there's a classical and there is the bhakti schools of meditation. In the classical school, the focus is more on removing the impurities with austerity, but in the bhakti school, the focus is more on harnessing the soul's natural attractive nature towards the Lord, and by harnessing that, we create an attraction to Krishna and let our consciousness naturally get attracted to Krishna, right? That way we are separating the soul's consciousness away from matter and more towards the spirit. And that's why the vairagya, the dispassion part, we work on by creating spiritual attraction. And the sixth aspect we discussed is from the meditation, the practice aspect. That's the main theme of our discussion. We spoke about how we are trying to practice in mantra meditation. Mantra becomes that main abhyasa, or the practice element, and these mantras are very, very strong presence of the Lord. And we saw how there are certain rigid mantras and there are the universal mantras, and in despite both, whether rigid or universal, in the mantra meditation process, we go through this three stages, which is namely chanting, hearing, and praying. While chanting happens on a physical space, hearing happens on a mental space, and praying happens at a heart or the soul space, right? And and I mentioned how we'll be elaborating on these three aspects in this particular course. And to understand the chanting aspect, we said we need to first understand the science of sound. We understood this 4 levels of sound, and how in our chanting we need to go as deeper, not get stuck in just the physical layer of just producing sound like a machine, but go deeper in our level of awareness. So understanding the principles of these 4 levels of mantras and sound in general, we need to understand that and try to produce that mantra from a more deeper space. And how do we do that? Physical alignment is so very important, and finding the right posture. And we discuss all the elements of what it means to have a good posture, and in the right posture, having the right pronunciation of the mantra, very, very clear, where each syllable is very, very distinct, each word is very, very distinct, in such a way when you try to produce the mantra, right, chant the mantra, that brings about a physical alignment. And then tomorrow we'll discuss more about finding that mental alignment by which we can hear properly, and also finding that heart alignment by which we can pray properly. All right. So let's see if we have any questions or comments. I'll end the discussion here, and let's see if we have. Okay. All right. So we have some comments. If anybody has any questions, if you want to unmute yourself, you can raise your hand. I'll unmute you and you can ask your questions directly, or okay, I think I see a question in the chat box from Ankita saying how to keep your back straight. Can you repeat that? So basically what I said is, for example, take a shawl or a blanket, roll it and sit on it. Put it under your sitting bones. So if you sit on that, naturally you will see your back becomes straight, right? That's what I mentioned. And yeah, okay. Can I repeat the C part? Somebody. Okay. All right. Let's see if there is. Okay. While I read the questions, I can see already few hands are up. Let's go with Gail. Would you like to ask your question? Okay, I can't hear you. Okay, let's see another. Kautilya Jha, would you like to ask your question? Oh, I think I think I didn't unmute you. Hold on.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare
Yeah,
Krishna.
yeah.
I can hear you now. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So a couple things. When you were trying to give us this exercise about hearing, trying to perceive the presence of objects, right? By how we feel, right? I was wondering, was that to get us to understand that we could have that similar experience with the mantra?
Yes.
Was that the point?
Yes. In fact, tomorrow
Okay.
we will do more such exercises. So probably after tomorrow's discussion, it will be more clear. But that's just a little add-on, like a side exercise I gave. But tomorrow we'll do more directly mantra and meditation related exercises in tomorrow's session. Yeah.
Okay. And then also, just to clarify about the intellectual and the para
Yes.
aspects of chanting. So the intellectual aspect is that when we chant, right, then our perception of reality, I guess what you say, improves or becomes clearer or something. But in the para, so that's an intellectual, it's a conceptual stage, right?
Yes.
So now with the para stage, para meaning, I forget the translation of para.
I said beyond.
Oh, okay, beyond the intellectual.
Or transcending matter is what para literally means. Okay,
so would you please repeat what that part means? Is beyond conceptual, it means now what? Beyond perceiving?
So even the intellectual worldview that we develop, a spiritualized intellectual worldview that you develop, is still on a material level. On a material intelligence level. But when you go beyond that, when you harness the soul's true potency, the soul's consciousness comes out in a very, very natural way.
Experiential then, just not just conceptual.
Correct. So that is what, so when we say you start experiencing spiritual reality, that happens at that para stage. Right. So and I also mentioned how that layer of spiritual ignorance or avidya surrounding the soul, it starts diminishing, and the veil is slowly removed, And that's when the true light of the soul starts manifesting in its full glory. Right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry, people. Just this Jnana Mudra, right?
Mm-hmm.
We say that, when you point with your index finger, somehow or other, that's like um, directing your attention away from, away from yourself, right?
You're not directing your attention. Basically, you're kind of pointing. You're throwing your awareness towards something else. If that's what you meant, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So then when we connect it with our thumb, right? Because you said when you use your thumb, somehow is what, bringing your attention back to yourself, or?
So our prana is doing multiple functions in this body. It is also empowering the mind in its all functions, and is also empowering the senses. The nature of senses is to always look outwards. Senses are like the sensors of the body. Literally, the word sensor comes from sense, whose nature is to always, you cannot not hear something when there's a sound in your house. You cannot not smell something if it smells, right? So the senses are always turning outwards, right? But for meditation to happen, you need to bring those energies inwards. So as much as possible, you try to bring the energies inwards. So even subtly, when this finger, it has its nature of, when I use the word finger, it's not just literally this finger is creating a problem, but we have a nature of wanting to turn outwards all the time. That ability to turn inwards is stimulated by this Jnana Mudra. So by touching the tip of the index finger with the tip of the thumb, we are starting to now turn inwards and directing our awareness inwards. And that is how our inner awareness becomes very strong.
But when you say returning our attention inwards, we're turning our attention inwards towards what exactly?
Towards the object of meditation that we have chosen.
Okay.
In this case, a mantra.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, which is Krishna. Okay.
Right, the Krishna's mantra, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu.
All right, thank you. Kautilya Prabhu, I realized my mistake last time. Can you unmute yourself and speak?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhu, my question is, we spoke about how happiness is all about an absorbed state of mind.
Right.
How then you told about how we can develop this absorbed state of mind by our chanting, hearing, and the praying process. Now, my question is, Prabhuji, since you also, I attended one of your lectures previously also, you said that the 22 hours when we are not chanting, that determines, the chattering of the mind or how focused we can be during the 2 hours. So my question is how to remain absorbed during those 22 hours. What can we practically do to remain absorbed? Like I have heard people saying, when you take a shower, feel the water going through. When you are eating, don't watch the TV. Focus, be aware of what you are chewing, what you are eating, so many things. So what should exactly be done? Does that really help being aware all the time? Because you told we have to be aware of the mantra,
right?
Not the physical things which are happening, like feeling the breeze, looking at the birds, being
right.
aware.
Right.
So how?
Actually, Prabhu, this is going to be our discussion tomorrow when I elaborate more on the praying aspect, because praying is something that we just don't do during the 2 hours of chanting. Our entire life has to become a prayer. And I'm going to elaborate. So I will ask you to just reserve your question for tomorrow. I'll be elaborating a lot on this theme. If you still feel it has been unanswered, probably we can elaborate more on the tomorrow. So just hold on till tomorrow. That will be our, one of the questions for tomorrow. All right. So, I'll read a question. And there are a lot of questions in the chat box as well. So, Tabuji is asking us to talk about the science of sound. So tomorrow probably I'll elaborate a little more on that, because our exercises are centered around that theme. So we will do that. Anupama ji is asking this question that I have noticed that whenever I chant with beads, my focus shifts on the number of rounds, the number of beads left, etc., rather than hearing and connecting them with Lord. Without beads, the concentration is better. Hearing without beads, my concentration is better. It's not very disciplined. Please advise. Okay. Yeah, I understand, Anupama ji, where this question is coming from, because many times we learn the methods of japa or mantra meditation as a mere chanting process, but not so much on the hearing and praying aspect, right? So because of that, when we pick up beads, if the focus is only on the chanting part, then our focus will only be, okay, how many rounds left? It becomes like a task list, right? But rather, as we discussed, meditation is not a technique, it's a whole inner transformation. So when you move from a chanter to a hearer, then you will see how powerful these beats can be in bringing your awareness back in the hearing process every time you get distracted. See, our acharyas have not recommended the beats for nothing. If it was a distraction, as you mentioned, our acharyas would have never encouraged us, right? So clearly you will see that as you gradually progress from, as long as you're still in that task list mode, I have to chant, I have to finish the round, I have to, this is number of list of mantras I need to finish. If that is if you are in that chanting mode, literally producing sound mode, then the beats can be a distraction. I can understand that, right? But if you actually can enter into, and tomorrow we're going to do that practice also, hearing, how to exercise our hearing ability. How do we harness the power of hearing? We're going to do some exercises for that. If you can do that, you will see that at that stage, beads will be a very, very powerful ally that we have during the meditation process, like that. Yeah. So then, yeah. Okay. Okay. I think there's another question in the chat box. How can we go beyond the distraction when we do meditation, right? So that's where effective hearing comes. So I think most of the questions, I'm very happy to see your questions, because you're actually thinking ahead in the syllabus. So that shows we are all moving in the right direction. So yes, I think this question is from Vikas Jainji. Yes, so you are thinking in the right direction. So tomorrow we're going to talk about that. Now, how with effective hearing, we can actually go beyond the distractions. And what to speak of, praying is the most powerful way to overcome all distractions, or entering into the praying mode. Neeruji is asking this question, that what if we aren't able to sit cross-legged due to health reasons? That's fine. You don't have to, if you have a knee issue, or say somebody's pregnant, or whatever, old age, whatever, arthritis. So it's okay. You don't have to worry about that. But at least, try to, even if you're sitting on a chair, try to keep your back straight, and try to keep both your legs crossed to whatever extent possible, right? Don't sit like this, but at least try to keep your legs together this way, right? But again, like I said, don't think that without this we cannot do chanting. It's not like that. Ultimately, the deeper meditation, mantra meditation, happens in the next two stages. But due to physical reasons, if you feel so, then don't worry about that. Try to sit in a nice comfortable posture. But comfortable means not so comfortable that you fall asleep, but steady, comfortable, meditative posture, like that. All right. I see another question here. Okay, somebody sent a direct message saying, I have a question regarding emotional responses, because sometimes when someone scolds or something happens not according to what we expect, it has a great effect on me. So how to avoid that? Please, if you could elaborate. Because each thing is good or bad. So how to focus more on the good part of our emotional responses? Yes, exactly. Yeah, one of the effects that you will see in meditation, again, a theme which I'll elaborate upon tomorrow, is without a relaxed mind, you cannot practice spirituality. And entering into that kind of a relaxed state of mind means where slowly you start to become a witness of your internal states. So yes, so externally there could be, your mind can sometimes go through its, oh, now I'm angry. Oh, now I'm happy. Oh, now I'm sad. Oh, now I'm feeling elated. So those external worldly emotions may be there, but as you start to become a witness of your mind, you'll start seeing, oh, why am I feeling so disturbed and agitated at this point? Right? So that developing that viraga literally means that. So when you enter into a more deeper meditative state, you are training your mind to enter, to access that viraga, the vairagya aspect, right? So that way you can actually transcend many of these worldly emotional responses that we have, that emotional dualities that we experience. You'll be able to transcend that deeper. Okay, yeah, okay, this is another repeat of the question then. Okay, right. Okay, this is one. Let's take this one last question from Ish Gupta ji. Should difference classical and bhakti of meditation be understood in terms of the object of meditation only? Not just the object of meditation, but even the mood of meditation. If you see the classical versus the bhakti styles of meditation, the difference was more, what are you focusing on? In the classical school, the focus on how do I somehow force and bring my mind with austerity into an object of meditation, right? Even sometimes the classical meditators also have the Lord as, they may have Krishna as an object of meditation, but their focus is not about attracting their mind to Krishna, but forcing their mind to remember Krishna. Versus in the bhakti school, it's about how to develop that natural attraction to Krishna through service, through blessings, through prayers, right? Through all these different methods. How do I bring my mind to Krishna? So that is the subtle difference in the mood, like that. All right. So we are over time by 10 minutes. So I'll take leave and thank you all so much for joining us today. So tomorrow we will go to the second part of our seminar, where we will conclude with understanding about the deeper aspects. So we saw just the physical alignment today. Tomorrow we'll talk about the mental and the heart alignments of hearing and praying. And of course, please keep your speaker or earphones ready tomorrow, because tomorrow I will need your ears, because we have to hear. We're going to do some exercise in hearing. So I want your ears alert. So if possible, try to sit in a more quiet place, or put on some earphones or something if you don't want to disturb people around you. All right. So thank you so much. So we'll conclude with the closing mantras. Joining your palms together. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much. See you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.